Most people have never learned how to leave. They know how to arrive, how to perform, how to hold a position under pressure. But the exit, the moment of withdrawal, the decision to remove yourself from a situation, a relationship, a system, that is where most people destroy everything they built. They leave too early and look weak. They leave too late and look desperate. They leave loudly and hand their enemies ammunition. They leave quietly and let the narrative be written by the people they left behind. The exit is not the end of the game. In Machiavelli's world, the exit is the game. Because how you leave a situation determines what position you hold when you enter the next one. Every relationship, every alliance, every institution, every room you have ever walked out of has either increased your power or diminished it. And in almost every case, it was not the leaving that decided which, it was how you left. Machiavelli spent his entire life studying this. Not from the outside, from inside regimes that rose and collapsed. Watching men who held everything lose it in a single badly executed exit. Watching men who had nothing recover everything through a single perfectly timed withdrawal. He drew conclusions that most people are not equipped to hear. That is exactly why you need to hear. You know what a bad exit costs. You have left a job in frustration and watched the narrative collapse behind you. Suddenly you were the problem, the difficult one, the one who could not handle it. The people who stayed got to write the story. You were not there to correct it. You have ended a relationship badly, with too much said, too much revealed, too much anger discharged in the wrong direction at the wrong moment, and spent months afterward managing the wreckage. The power you had accumulated inside that dynamic evaporated in the final conversation. You have walked away from a situation that needed to be walked away from, but walked away wrong. Without securing what you had built, without controlling the perception, without ensuring that the exit served your next position rather than destroying it. And the worst part is that in almost every case, you knew something was wrong with how it was ending. You felt it while it was happening, the conversation going somewhere it should not go, the words coming out with too much heat behind them, the door closing in a way that felt permanently wrong. But you did not know how to stop it, because nobody taught you the architecture of a powerful exit. Nobody explained that leaving is a skill, one of the highest order skills in the entire psychology of power, and that it can be studied, practiced, and executed with the same cold precision as any other strategic move. Machiavelli knew, and the men who understood his doctrine left situations in ways that confused their enemies, preserved their alliances, and positioned them for the next move before anyone else had realized the last one was complete. To understand how to exit with power intact, you must first understand precisely why most exits destroy it. Machiavelli observed that every situation a person occupies, every relationship, alliance, institution, or social position generates what he called accumulated capital. Not financial capital, political capital. The weight of history, of demonstrated competence, of reciprocal obligation, of reputation built through sustained presence. This capital is real. It has operational value. It can be converted into opportunity, protection, influence. The critical insight, the one most people miss entirely, is that this capital does not automatically transfer when you leave. It is attached to the situation, not to you. When you exit, you have a narrow window to extract that capital and carry it with you. Miss the window, and it stays behind. Worse, it inverts. The capital you built becomes the material your enemies use to construct the narrative of your failure. Machiavelli identified 3 specific exit errors that destroy accumulated capital. He observed them in every court, every republic, every military campaign he ever studied. The first is the emotional exit.
The person who leaves in anger, in pain, in public frustration. They feel the discharge of emotion as relief in the moment. What they have actually done is transfer the moral authority of the situation entirely to the people they left behind. The one who loses composure on the way out loses the argument permanently, regardless of who was actually right. The second is the premature exit. The person who leaves before the situation has ripened, before the position they occupy has been fully extracted, before the alliances they need have been secured, before the next position has been prepared. They abandon leverage they had not yet converted. They leave a hand they had not yet played. And the people who remain inherit the value they built and never paid for it. The third is the announced exit. The person who tells the room they are leaving before they have actually left. This is perhaps the most common and the most catastrophic. The moment you announce your intention to withdraw, you surrender all negotiating leverage. Every party in the situation immediately recalibrates their behavior based on your declared exit. And none of those recalibrations serve your interests. Machiavelli was brutal about all three. He wrote that the lion who announces he is leaving the hunt has already been replaced before he reaches the tree line. The other animals do not mourn his departure. They divide his territory.
Machiavelli's doctrine of the powerful exit rests on four principles. They appear across the prince, the discourses, and his private letters. Taken together, they form the most complete strategic framework for withdrawal ever assembled. The first principle is timing over impulse. Machiavelli wrote that the difference between a retreat and a rout is entirely a matter of timing. A retreat executed at the correct moment, before the situation has turned against you, before the vulnerabilities have been exposed, before the costs have exceeded the returns, is not weakness. It is the highest expression of strategic intelligence. The general who withdraws from a battle he cannot win and preserves his forces for the next engagement has lost nothing. The general who stays and fights to prove a point loses everything, including the capacity to fight the next battle. The instinct of most people is to stay until the situation forces them out. Machiavelli regarded this as one of the most dangerous instincts a person can possess. Because when the situation forces you out, the terms of your exit are determined by the situation, not by you. You leave with what you can carry in a hurry, not with what you chose to take. The second principle is narrative control. Machiavelli understood that every exit creates a vacuum, and that vacuums are immediately filled by the interpretation of whoever remains. The person who exits without controlling the narrative hands their enemies a blank page and a pen. They will write whatever serves them, and in your absence, with no counter-narrative available, their version becomes the official version. The powerful exit does not just remove the person from the situation. It leaves behind a constructed story, one that serves the person who left, not the people who stayed. This requires preparation. It requires that before you move, you have already seeded the narrative you want to survive you in that space. The third principle is the preservation of obligation. Machiavelli observed that the most valuable asset most people hold in any situation is not their position. It is the obligations others hold toward them, the favors owed, the debts accumulated, the reciprocal agreements, spoken and unspoken. A powerful exit extracts these obligations rather than canceling them. It ensures that the people you are leaving behind still owe you something and know it, rather than feeling released by your departure. The fourth principle is positional preparation. No exit is complete until the next position has been secured. Machiavelli was absolute about this. A man who leaves one situation without having already entered another does not exit with power. He exits into a void.
And a void is not a position, it is a vulnerability. The powerful exit is always a transition, never a termination. You are not leaving, you are repositioning.
In 49 BC, Julius Caesar stood on the northern bank of the Rubicon River, facing a decision that Machiavelli would later study with careful precision. Caesar had been in Gaul for 9 years. He had conquered a territory larger than modern France. He had built the most battle-hardened, personally loyal army in Roman history. He had accumulated political capital that the Senate in Rome had spent years trying to neutralize. And now the Senate had issued an ultimatum: disband your army and return to Rome as a private citizen, or be declared an enemy of the state. Most men in his position would have negotiated, would have sent envoys, would have tried to find a compromise that preserved some portion of what they had built while avoiding the confrontation. They would have, in Machiavellian terms, announced their intentions before acting. They would have given their enemies time to prepare. Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army at dawn, without announcement, without negotiation, without warning. He did not exit his position in Gaul. He converted it into an offensive. He did not leave his army behind to comply with the Senate's demand.
He brought it with him as the instrument of his next position. What Machiavelli found significant was not the military boldness of the crossing. It was the narrative architecture that surrounded it. Caesar understood that the moment he moved, the story of what he was doing would be written by someone. He wrote it himself in advance, by framing his crossing not as rebellion, but as the defense of his honor and his soldiers against a corrupt Senate that had broken Roman law. He crossed the river. He already controlled the story of why. By the time his enemies had assembled their response, the narrative and the military position were both beyond their reach. He did not exit the situation in Gaul. He used the situation in Gaul as the foundation of the next situation. Every alliance built over 9 years of campaign, every obligation accumulated, every soldier whose loyalty had been earned through shared hardship, all of it came with him across the river. The Senate had expected him to leave everything behind and return as a private citizen. He left nothing behind. He arrived in Rome with the full weight of everything he had built, deployed as a single coordinated movement. Machiavelli would describe this as the ideal exit, not a withdrawal, a conversion. The power accumulated in one situation transformed without loss into the power required for the next.
In 1433, Cosimo de Medici was arrested by his political enemies in Florence, held in the Palazzo della Signoria, and sentenced to exile. His enemies, the Albizzi family and their allies, believed they had destroyed him. They had removed him from the city, stripped him of his political position, and separated him from the financial network that was the foundation of his power. They had made the error that Machiavelli would later identify as the most common and most fatal mistake a political opponent can make. They had removed the man, but left the structure intact. Cosimo had spent 20 years building a financial network that extended across every major city in Europe. The Medici Bank had branches in Venice, Rome, Geneva, Bruges, London. The obligations that network generated, the debts, the deposits, the letters of credit, the political relationships built through financial service, none of that was stored in Florence. None of it could be exiled. During his time in exile, Cosimo did not mourn. He did not protest. He did not make the emotional exit, the public complaints, the declarations of injustice, the demands for sympathy that would have confirmed his enemy's narrative that he was broken. He continued operating the network. He continued building the obligations. He continued positioning.
1 year after his exile, the political landscape of Florence had shifted. The Albizzi's allies had fractured. The financial relationships that sustained the city's commerce, relationships that ran through the Medici network, had created a practical dependence that the new leadership could not ignore. The people of Florence had experienced, in concrete financial terms, what the city operated like without Cosimo's network actively serving their interests. He was invited back, not as a defeated exile seeking mercy, as a necessary component of a system that had discovered it could not function without him. He returned to Florence in 1434 and effectively ruled it for the next 30 years. Machiavelli analyzed this case with particular care. He noted that Cosimo's power during exile was, in several measurable respects, greater than his power before it, because exile had demonstrated something that years of presence had obscured. It had made the dependence visible. It had converted a network that people took for granted into a network whose absence they had felt in their daily lives. The exit was forced. The response to it was entirely Cosimo's design. He left the room. He left the room in a way that made the room cold without him. And when they asked him back, he walked in on his own terms.
In October 1555, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, ruler of the largest empire in the Western world since Rome, stood before the assembled court in Brussels and abdicated. He was 55 years old. He had ruled for nearly 4 decades. He had fought wars on every front, against France, against the Ottomans, against the Protestant princes of Germany. He was exhausted, gouty, physically diminished, and he had reached a conclusion that most rulers in his position could not have reached because their ego would not permit it. The empire was becoming ungovernable as a single entity. The forces pulling it apart, religious, political, geographic, were stronger than any single person's capacity to hold them together. Continuing to hold the position would not preserve the power. It would consume it, slowly, in a series of losing battles against forces that could not be defeated. Charles made the decision that Machiavelli would have recognized as the highest expression of strategic intelligence available to him. He chose the terms of his own exit before the situation chose them for him. He did not wait to be deposed. He did not wait for a military defeat or a political crisis to force the question. He abdicated at the moment when he still held the moral authority to define what his abdication meant, before it could be defined by his enemies as collapse or defeat. He divided the empire deliberately, assigning the Spanish territories to his son Philip and the Austrian territories to his brother Ferdinand. He ensured that the 2 most powerful positions in Europe would be held by members of his family. He converted his personal power into a dynastic architecture that would outlast him by generations. Then he retired to a monastery in Spain and spent the last years of his life in the only peace, he said, he had ever known. His enemies had expected his exit to create a vacuum they could exploit. Instead, they found that every significant position in the resulting landscape was held by someone who owed their position to Charles. The exit had not diminished his legacy, it had distributed it across a structure that was harder to attack than any single ruler could have been. Machiavelli's 4th principle, positional preparation, ensuring the next position is secured before the exit is executed, had never been demonstrated at larger scale. Charles had not just secured his next position, he had secured the positions of his entire bloodline.
Now reduce the scale to your own life. You are not managing an empire, but the mechanics are identical. Think about the situations you are currently in. The job, the relationship, the social dynamic, the arrangement that has stopped serving you but that you have not yet left. Ask yourself with Machiavellian precision which of the 4 exit errors you are currently committing. Are you staying until the situation forces you out, waiting for the crisis that removes the decision from your hands because leaving on your own terms feels like admitting something you are not ready to admit? Are you planning an emotional exit, accumulating grievances until the pressure requires a discharge that will cost you the narrative and hand your enemies exactly the ammunition they need to define who you were in that space?
Are you announcing your intentions before your position is secured, letting people know you are considering leaving, thereby surrendering every piece of leverage you currently hold before the exit has actually begun? Or are you simply staying because you have not yet prepared the next position, and you know at some level that exiting into a void is not an exit at all? Machiavelli would look at each of these situations with the same cold assessment. He would say that the person who cannot exit on their own terms has already lost. Not because they are weak, because they have confused the situation they are in with the only situation available to them.
The exit with power intact is not complicated. It is not dramatic. It does not require unusual gifts or exceptional courage. It requires 4 things, executed in sequence. You time it. You move before the situation deteriorates to the point where the exit is forced, not chosen. The moment you can see the end of a situation clearly, when the costs are beginning to exceed the returns, when the trajectory has become predictable, that is the moment to begin preparing. Not the moment to leave, the moment to prepare. You control the narrative. Before you move, you seed the story you want to survive you in that space. Not defensively, strategically. You decide what the room will say about you after you have left it. And then you construct your exit in a way that makes that story the most available and the most credible interpretation of what happened. You extract the obligations.
You do not cancel the debts people owe you by leaving. You make them portable. You ensure that the people you are leaving behind understand that the relationship and the obligation within it continues beyond the specific situation. You are not abandoning them. You are moving to a new position from which you will continue to be relevant to their interests. This is not manipulation. This is the architecture of lasting influence. You enter before you exit. The next position is not something you find after leaving. It is something you have already begun building while you are still present in the current one. You leave one room and step directly into another. There is no gap. There is no void. There is only the transition, smooth, controlled, executed on your terms. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must always be ready to leave one form behind and take another as circumstances dictate. The operative word is ready, not reactive, not responsive, ready. Readiness is not anxiety about the exit. It is the quiet, permanent preparation of someone who understands that every situation is temporary and has decided in advance that when the time comes, they will be the one who decides how it ends. The person who knows how to leave is the person who can never be trapped, and a person who cannot be trapped cannot be controlled. That is the entire doctrine. That is the power the exit protects. What I just gave you is the strategic skeleton, the tactical layer, how to execute narrative control in real time, how to extract obligations without the other party realizing what you are doing, how to prepare the next position while maintaining full presence in the current one without triggering suspicion. That is not content I can distribute here. Not because it is illegal, because the platform that hosts this video is built on the assumption that you will stay, that you will keep watching, that you will never learn the mechanics of a clean exit. The irony is not lost on me. The full architecture is behind the join button. The people who find it will not be surprised that most people never do. That has always been the point of a well-constructed exit. Most people do not see it happening until it is already complete.